This is admittedly a slightly frivolous slide, but it's also true. Three-act structure is in a lot of ways just a fancy name for beginning, middle, and end of the story. The beginning, you set things up, introduce all the relevant players and actors. The middle, you tell all the trials and tribulations, and at the end, you tell how everything wrapped up. It's how we tell stories all the time. Um, Now, this is where I'm going to show some of my biases as a planner, because I'm going to talk about Act 3 first. And that's because when I'm planning something, I like to know where I'm going first. Planning isn't a one and done process. I don't come and nail the perfect ending and then go from there. But I like to have a rough sense of where I'm going, and then I'll iterate and refine this. So the good news is that from a structure perspective, Act 3 is really straightforward. This is this is where we ask if characters can close the reality gap, and the answer is yes. So can Sherlock Holmes solve the case? Yes. Can Bill and Ted get an A on their history presentation? Yes. Can Hamlet kill his uncle? Go for it, you crazy Dane. And Carrie, yes, I do plan a little backwards. I will tend to do figure out my end, and then I'll come in at the beginning and I'll figure my way to get. But that's again, this is me. So not every it's this isn't like I say, this is not like you have to do it this way. This is what works for me. If you are much like someone who's raised more by as a pantser, like by the seat of their pants, and that's like, they at the end, you can like this, you can take a step back when you come to edit and be like, okay, like, does this sort of follow? Like, am I following a pattern, recognize a pattern? There's this bit here which isn't working. Like, maybe I can compare this to some of these patterns that I've been learning about, and maybe this is why it's not. So, but so you certainly don't have to. I just like to, if I'm going on a journey, I like to know where I'm going. So, but so yeah, Act 3 also means at the end of the story, a character is going to know everything they need to know in order to close the reality gap. So any tools, any friends they need, any help they want to get, anything instructive text messages, it has all been received. And if you're a planner starting here, will help you recognize all the things that they have to go through to get these tools. They'll all those tools, friends, text messages, etc. And then Act 3 is where they put it all together. And when they do that, they're going to receive whatever it is they desire. And then coming to that, we're going to see that they or their situation or both have irrevocably changed. Our two fundamental elements of story, desire and change, are going to be satisfied. And that's how we know it's the end. Also, bear in mind that the reality gap is at its widest here. Things have gone fully off the rails for the characters, and only some supreme effort is going to fix things. So it shouldn't feel easy at 3. And then once you've closed the reality gap, once the characters have what they desire and the change is demonstrated, I recommend just getting out of the story as quickly as is humanly possible. There's generally no need to hang around and let us know how everyone's lives panned out off that point. That's not what the story is about. It's about desire and change. So jumping from Act 3 and closing the reality gap, now going back to the beginning, and the role of Act 1 is to set the scene and launch your characters on their way. Using film parlance, there's a shot called the establishing shot of the scene. That's a big wide shot where we see where everyone is and where they are in relation to each other. And it's often used at or near the beginning of a scene, just so everyone's clear on what's going on. And that's what we're doing here. We're defining the starting state of the world. So in terms of thinking about that starting state, this is another reason I like to start with Act 3 when I plan, because then I can think about how far away my character is from that end state in their starting state. And the further away they are, then the bigger the journey and the more effort will be required. And the more effort we'll see the character put in, that makes them seem more and more heroic to us. So you often want to make sure that they are really far away from that end state. Another way to think of Act 1 is to think of the setup to a joke. If Act 3 is your punchline, then everything in Act 1 has to be working to set that up. For example, a priest and a rabbi walked into a bar. The barman asks why the long face does not work. The setup and the punchline don't match. And it's not just because the punchline isn't set up. It also doesn't work because the intro sets up a certain set of expectations, which then aren't fulfilled. For example, while it's hopefully obvious that if your book ends with a murder being solved, you're going to need to set that up with a murder in the beginning. But it is also very much the case that if your book has a murder in the beginning, you're going to need to address that in some way by the end of the book. Yes, that's an extreme example, but Act 1, especially early in Act 1, is in many ways a series of promises that you're making to your reader. So being mindful of those promises is a worthwhile exercise. Where Act One ends is often a little nebulous. There's a lot of different definitions floating around about like where the transition to Act Two tends to come. They all tend to identify a fairly small window of time, so it's not critical where you're in it. I personally tend toward the different definition I first heard, which is that Act One ends when the protagonist decides to actually really pursue their desire. But really, anywhere around there is we're sort of in the right ballpark. And again, that's not the rule. Sometimes a character announces their intent to pursue a desire in the first paragraph of the story, and then you go back and you build up the world, showing how you came to that decision, or you intercut backstory with the first try-fail cycle. And if you do that, you haven't failed at structure. You just played around with it in a way that works better for your story. So I'm going to say this a lot, but think of these as general principles. So you introduce the world, the characters, their desire, and you get them started pursuing it, though not necessarily in that order. So